To the committee of the whole meeting. It's just 6 o'clock, so I'll ask the clerk to take the roll call, please.
Trustee Bachner.
Here.
Trustee Kargi.
Here.
Trustee Vasquez.
Here.
Trustee Brennan. Trustee Hennick.
Here.
Trustee O'Connell.
Here.
President Adduci.
Here. So we're going to hand it over to Lisa.
Yes, ma'am.
Okie dokie. Lisa.
All right. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to spend a little bit of time tonight talking to you about our capital improvement plan for the coming fiscal years. This is a 5-year capital improvement plan from fiscal years 2021 to 2025. The CIP is a planning tool for the village that identifies major capital projects and purchases as well as their funding sources. It's prepared by village staff and presented tonight to the village board as the first step in preparing the annual budget. The CIP document that's provided to you is also available at the Village Hall for review, and it's also available online for the public to view. So if anybody wants to take a look at that, by all means. Tonight we're going to focus on what's ahead for fiscal year 2021 and seek your direction regarding these proposed projects, as well as any other projects that you think should be under consideration that weren't already discussed. Approved projects will be incorporated into the fiscal year 2021 budget that staff is in the process of assembling, and you'll be seeing in the coming weeks and months. So as we head into our presentation tonight, as I like to say, it's not a government presentation without a lot of acronyms. So here is a map of all of the acronyms that you'll encounter as you read through this document, and they refer to different projects and funding sources. If you have any questions, please let us know. Otherwise, we will proceed. Hearing none, and we'll proceed, but please don't hesitate to go back if you have any questions for us as we make our way through this document, and if there's some terminology that we're using that you're not familiar with. The CIP that you received is divided into 6 project categories: buildings and improvements, vehicles, equipment, information technology, street, sewers and alleys, and water and sewer improvements. And on the right-hand side, we've identified the various funding sources for these different project categories that you saw on the previous slide. The addition here includes grant revenues, parking reserves, and TIF district revenues for qualifying projects. So with that, we will dive right into the first category, which is facilities. There are 4 village-owned facilities that are accounted for in the CIP: the Village Hall, the Police Firing Range, the Public Works Garage, and the Pumping Station. The 2021 CIP includes projects at the Village Hall and at the Public Works Garage. You'll see they're both funded through SIF, and they're ranked as recommended, and the Public Works improvements are ranked as contingent on funding. Meaning if a funding source is not available or if we don't have sufficient funding, those projects may show up in a future CIP because they'll be deferred until funding becomes available for that project. The Village Hall project improvements include energy efficiency lighting upgrades. Currently, much of the lighting here inside the Village Hall is fluorescent bulbs, so we're proposing that we upgrade those light fixtures to LED for all the good reasons that you upgrade light fixtures to LED. This is based on a facility assessment that ComEd helped us perform to identify opportunities for energy efficiency, and the price that you see here includes and takes advantage of a variety of incentive programs that ComEd has for these types of projects. We're also suggesting that we replace the controls that help you access the front door here. If you've hit the button and the door hasn't opened exactly right away, or if you've had any trouble with the front doors, it's because the system needs to be replaced. And that's an important part of ensuring that the building remains accessible to the public. So we're suggesting that that control system be replaced. The Public Works Garage improvements, which I mentioned before, are contingent on funding, include the replacement of 2 overhead garage doors, as well as repairs to some interior walls and the restroom facilities that are down at that building. If there are no questions about facilities, I'll move on to vehicles, and certainly we're trying to leave time at the end in the event that a question pops up for you later. The village operates and maintains a large fleet of vehicles that enable our day-to-day operations, and the systematic funding for the replacement of these vehicles ensures that we maintain service levels while avoiding spikes in funding. So diving right into the police vehicles, there is only 1 squad suggested for replacement in the coming fiscal year. That is Squad 6. That vehicle was originally scheduled to be replaced this fiscal year, but we're putting it off for a year because it continues to operate for us and also has low enough mileage that we can continue to use it. This is an important piece of equipment in the fleet. Of course, they're all important, but this car in particular houses our ALPR system, which you would typically read about in the equipment section of the CIP. The ALPR is the automatic license plate reading system, and that is an important component of the village's parking and traffic enforcement efforts. And that is housed in Squad 6. The fire department is also proposing one vehicle for replacement. That's an administrative vehicle used by the fire marshal for public education and inspection programs. That was also deferred from this fiscal year to next fiscal year because it remains in good operating condition. The Public Works Department is asking that 2 vehicles be replaced. The first is a large dump truck, and with that large dump truck comes a larger price tag than some of the other equipment or vehicles that you've seen so far. It's important to note that Truck 44 has been a part of our fleet for about 20 years. It underwent some refurbishment a few years ago to extend its useful life and to reduce the overall cost to the village. But despite that, it's now in need of replacement. And so we're suggesting that we do that next fiscal year. We're also asking to replace pickup truck number 48, which is a smaller vehicle used to plow parking lots and alleys during our snow events.
Does it have another use during the year, or is it just used in the winter?
Mark, you want to take that?
So it's used for leaf operations also. So the majority of the time it's plowing, and then from around October 1st until the middle of December, we're using that truck every day to push piles of leaves. You may have seen them running around with big
Yeah.
screens, or they look like plows on the front, and we use them to plow piles. So they'll go forward and backward 100 times a day, every day for
And
months.
it just sits idle then in the summer?
No, we use them. We use them for everything during the summer, hauling, picking up trash, all kind of operations. So they go 24/7 or all year.
And I just want to point out too, I want to hand it to Mark and his staff on that truck 44. I mean, that they have a vehicle 20, 22 years into the fleet, and to be refurbished and moved along says a lot about Mark and his staff and the care that they give to those vehicles. So the fact that we were able to keep that truck in operation as long as we did is no small feat.
So is that one of those things that would you just trade it in, or would you just keep using it until it falls apart?
So what we do is auction them now, and we've had some real good luck with open-off auction service, and we get a good return on those older trucks. People that use them for demolition, concrete hauling, and even snowplow private companies will use them. So we get a good return on that. Yeah.
Yeah, back in the day, OpenOff used to run municipal auctions through the councils of government. So WCMC, for example, would have 1 or 2 events, and you'd bring all your vehicles over to Triton College, and they do a live auction. And now they have moved on with more of these sophisticated online components of that. But we get a really good. I'm always amazed at the what people buy and what they will sometimes pay for certain items. So.
I think there's a few examples of how we've used OpenOff in the CIP and the prices that we've gotten for some of our vehicles. So.
One I think was thought you were maybe gonna get 13 or somewhere around, and actually got over 20.
All right, that is it for vehicles, and so we're going to go ahead and move on to equipment. Absent any other questions at the moment? All right. So before we dive into these areas in particular, just give you a quick overview of the different pieces of equipment that are being suggested between the police, fire, and public works departments. The first is in the police department. They have a series, or an inventory, of radios, both in the car and handheld, that they use for critical communication purposes. We're suggesting a multi-year, multi-phase replacement to spread the cost out over a few years. And so we're suggesting in fiscal year 2021 that the police department replace 5 VHF handheld radios. The fire department also is in need of replacing radios. They don't have quite as many in terms of quantity, and they were also able to secure a grant through FEMA to purchase those radios, and the plan is to purchase those this year. So it allowed us to accelerate the replacement of those radios and find a great funding source for them because they are a little bit expensive. We're also suggesting that we replace the Village Hall camera system. If you've looked in and around the building, particularly the exterior areas or the public areas, we have a system of cameras that we use to monitor the lobbies, the prisoner cells, the booking room, in other areas in and outside of the building. So we are suggesting that those be replaced. They are starting to show their age and wear a little bit. We're also in the fire department suggesting the replacement of the SCBA air compressor. And a note about this is if you've been on the board for a little while, these may sound a little familiar. You may have seen this in previous CIPs. This is a piece of equipment that won't die, and that's great. So we continue to hold on to it, but it is a mission critical piece of equipment because it fills the SCBAs that the firefighters use. So in the event that it goes down, we need to be prepared to replace that right away. So there is, if there's a little bit of lead time between the time it goes down and the time we are able to replace it, the fire department has a great contingency plan to make sure that it doesn't interrupt operations. But we continue to carry this over from previous CIPs to make sure we're always prepared.
How old is that piece of equipment? Because this is now the 7th time you told me we need to replace it.
Exactly. Kurt, how old is that thing?
I would say it's almost 20 years old.
Wow.
Who built it? Because I'm going to buy everything they own, everything they make.
Yeah.
Lego.
Well, I think we'd probably be replacing it with the same type of equipment, except we'd have to upgrade it a little bit because the NFPA rules have changed, and technically the one that we have right now is not NFPA compliant.
Was that a problem?
No, the way we planned for that because it's supposed to have a CO sensor in it. So when it's filling the bottles, if it senses CO, it shuts off. But we get fresh air from the outside instead of from inside the apparatus bay. So it's always getting fresh air. So that the odds of it getting CO is very minimal.
But is there legal consequence? I mean, if I'm not NFPA, I've heard that acronym before.
We're okay right now. We're grandfathered in, but as soon as it goes down, we would have to bring it up to compliance.
Mm-hmm. All right. Moving on to our Public Works Department. The department is suggesting that we acquire a permeable paver maintenance system. We currently outsource that work to a third party, but given the number of permeable paver systems that have been installed in the community, as well as what we intend to or think we're going to be installing in the future, it makes sense at this point and it's financially feasible for us to move that in-house. There will be some immediate savings by no longer having to use a third party to perform that work, and certainly as our system of permeable pavers expands in the community, those savings will multiply. So we are suggesting we bring that in-house starting next year.
Do you know roughly what the outsourcing costs are now?
That John has or Mark has.
It's 12, right?
Yeah, so we spent I think 12 or 13,000 this past year, and that got us 2 alleys and the West Thatcher lot, and that was it. And
That includes labor, right?
yeah, everything, and then rechipping them because it blows a lot of that joint aggregate out of there. But with as many pavers as we're putting in, this kind of made more sense to try to get that in-house.
So we recoup it in roughly 5 years. No, 4 years.
It'll also allow us to maintain them on a more frequent basis, which we probably should be doing. We can't quite keep up with it. And again, as we put more in, that's just going to create a bigger backlog. So this kind of helps out in a couple of different avenues there.
There's some additional cost information on that particular system in your CIP. It talks about the cost per square foot and what it costs to maintain what we currently have using a third-party service versus what it costs to purchase this equipment. So in year one, it looks like there's going to be a savings of somewhere around $20,000 or between $19,000 and $20,000 just in year one. So the ROI on this should be pretty quick. Next, we have the replacement of unleaded and diesel fuel tanks that are housed at our Public Works Department. We have, obviously this comes with a pretty big price tag, so our Public Works Department has done some cost-benefit analysis to determine if there's any other scenario that's more cost-effective for the village. Replacement of only one type of tank, an acquisition of fuel from another source, even perhaps a retail source, acquisition of all types of fuel, keeping it in-house, and ultimately they determined, and it's in your CIP, that this continues to be the most cost-effective route. It does not just benefit the village, it also benefits other agencies within the community because the Park District, the dispatch center that's housed here at the Village Hall, School District 90, they all utilize this fuel system, and reimburse the village for those costs. So they're able to purchase fuel at a price below retail.
Can I ask you a question? In terms of that, if we're looking at a that affect this?
Sure.
Is it worth spending the money here at this time if we need to? I'm not sure if we do.
Yeah, good question.
Or whether this is something we could look or postpone until we make this other decision.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean that one we have listed as a recommended option, not a critical option for that reason. So we're going to hold off as long as we can on that, depending on how those other conversations play out.
Okay.
Are the current tanks leaking right now?
No.
I have a question in terms of the Park District and D90. So this figure in terms of the number of gallons, is that for all
Good question.
taxing bodies to use, or is that just our costs?
That's just our cost.
So there's in fact more
Right.
gas
Right.
there, obviously, that they're
Right. I just
paying
looked
for.
into the budget of what we pay for our costs on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would be kind of curious to see what they're both spent, just in terms of a broader tax savings to the community. It looks big on our line item, but if there's really a greater benefit for them to realize savings going this route, I think that's
Yeah, they do
A
get
valid
it at a
point.
very good rate. They get it at the bulk price that
So
we
we
just
don't-
pass through to them.
We don't mark it up to them?
No.
No. So we're bearing all the costs of
Mhm.
purchase and storage.
Right.
But I think in terms of evaluating the value, those would be good numbers to have.
Okay.
Sure. We can provide that. The Public Works Department is also suggesting the acquisition of a salt brine application equipment system. Salt brine is a solution that they use on the roadways during winter weather events to prevent snow and ice from adhering to the pavement. It reduces the amount of material that we have to use, reduces our costs for rock salt application, and is also a really effective solution. And we have Mark here tonight who's going to talk to you a little bit about some of the benefits of the salt brine solution in lieu of rock salt and their operations.
I love this whole topic, but it saves us a lot of money. Bottom line, and some of you may have been on the board a few years ago when you okayed the purchase of equipment to manufacture salt brine in house. That saves us a lot of money, and as a matter of fact, it costs us about 6.7 cents per gallon to manufacture in house. If we purchase that, it's 43 cents a gallon. This year we've used 5,000 gallons already, so there's been a significant savings this year alone. So there's two ways you can use this. It's a preventative measure. It's called anti-icing, and that is put down before a storm, and it creates melting at the onset of a storm, buys us some time, and keeps ice from bonding with the pavement. The second way we can use it is after a storm, and that's to melt ice, and we've used that a lot in alleys. When we're busy on the streets, we have to let the alleys go. At the end of the storm, we go through there and plow those, and if there's any kind of ice, we'll run that truck down the alley, spray it, and shortly after that, we've got wet pavement. What we found now is that the weather patterns have changed so much that we're having to respond to snow events while we're still picking up leaves on the streets. Our equipment is limited, very limited, for snow response during that time. And as I mentioned earlier, we're picking up leaves now from the beginning of October until the middle of December. And this year we got that early snow, and we really had a tough time because we didn't have enough vehicles ready for that. So I shouldn't say we weren't prepared. We are prepared, but we don't have enough vehicles if something really went wrong. So this will add 2 vehicles. Currently, we have 1 vehicle with 250-gallon capacity. This will add 2 vehicles at 450 gallons apiece. And I shouldn't say vehicles, but it's spray equipment or application equipment that goes in the back of a dump truck. So we really want to expand the use of the salt brine. It costs us about $4 per lane mile when using salt brine to treat the streets, as opposed to, I think it was $19. There in the CIP sheet, I did a cost analysis there. So, 25% of the salt cost when we're using salt brine, and it's very effective. So we want to expand on that, saves money, and also I think in the future it's going to be mandated that we reduce the use of rock salt. The runoff into natural waterways has caused a lot of attention with the Department of Natural Resources, and they're looking at limiting the amount of salt that we can apply to streets and roadways. So,
Is that because of proximity to the forest reserves? Or is it just generally, is it the DNR is looking at it for every community?
Yeah,
or just
runoff
those?
into natural waterways. So rivers, streams. For instance, in like Colorado, they can't even use rock salt; they use sand. So in some areas of the United States, salt is prohibited from being used. So I think you're going to see more of the salt being limited on our roadways. So we have to get creative, and this has been new technology, and people are embracing it, and it's really reduced our costs overall. So.
The salt brine, is this the same thing as I hear sometimes about beet juice being used on streets?
Yeah, so we used to use beet juice, and that is a different application. That's for temperatures lower than 20 degrees. That's sprayed onto rock salt and applied to roadways, and it will melt snow and ice below 0 temperatures. So that's what that's for. Yeah.
The beet juice
Beet
conversation.
juice,
I
yeah.
totally remember that.
So are we not using beet juice anymore, or
We're not. The cost is really high on it, and we found that mixing the salt brine with a little bit of calcium chloride is just as effective, and at a much lower cost. So, and it doesn't smell as bad either.
but are we going to be limited to using that brine with the IDNR, or no?
No,
Are they
rock salt.
So rock salt is what they're limiting, not brine solution.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yep. Salt brine is about a 23 to 25% solution, so you're using a quarter of the amount of salt.
But you should use rock salt as the salt, right?
It is. It takes rock salt and produces a suspended 23% suspended liquid. So that's what it is. Yeah.
Very good.
If you're having a birthday party and you want Mark to come and talk about this too, he's happy to. He's happy to attend.
I think we should
thought
host
maybe
a salt
brine
brine
in the
trivia
turkey.
night.
Yeah, well, that too.
Yeah. But I'm not quite sure I want to brine it with that.
But the evolution, the question about the beet juice is actually a good one because that was an evolution in the field, right, in public works, where that was the rage for a couple years, and then, you know,
And before that was a corn product, but it had so many solids in it that it clogged up our equipment. And we spent more time working on the equipment than we did spraying the streets. So
Yeah.
we went from the corn product to beet juice, and now we're using the salt brine with calcium chloride. So it's very effective.
So this goes in the back of a pickup truck?
It does. There's a 250-gallon tank, a small gasoline-powered pump, and then a spray bar. The new equipment will spray up to 3 lanes wide from a single unit.
It's gotta save you a few gallons with those big, as opposed to those big trucks too. So it's
Oh, sure. It's applied at a rate of about 50 gallons per lane mile. So, yeah, it's considerable savings.
per cost,
Yeah, you see the savings there? Yeah, it's amazing.
55 versus 430.
And in a light snow, we can apply that and not even use rock salt, and it'll melt the snow just the same. So we don't even have to use that.
right. And the idea here is with having multiple trucks, we'll be able to hit not only the town faster, but hopefully hit the entire community. Because based sometimes on the timing of events, we can only get to major arterial roads and things like that.
Exactly. And while our large vehicles are tied up with the leaf operations, the smaller vehicles can handle these units or carry these units. So we have them ready to go at any given time. So that's the idea behind it. Yep.
All right. Thank you, Mark. No, it's very interesting. I like it. I started out in a public works department. It's great to see how these things have evolved over time. That's my first. All right. So the final piece of equipment that we'll talk about is something called a grapple bucket. Mark may know all things grapple bucket as well, but ultimately it is a fleet accessory that will help the village load large quantities of leaves and brush. It's goes on a front end loader, and is more appropriately equipped to handle those types of large loads. The equipment that we have now, it's functional, but it's not really designed for these heavy loads, and obviously more rain, more snow equals heavier leaves. So we've had some equipment failures and some challenges with that. So this equipment not only is better suited to the task, it'll also help with efficiency in leaf collection operations and any kind of storm cleanup that we need to perform.
I just wanted to mention we broke a record this year. We hauled 2,000 tons of leaves out of River Forest, which was an all-time high. And I don't
What do
know
you think that
if
is?
you realize how many leaves we pick up, but 2,000 tons.
No, no, I heard the tons.
Yeah.
But I say, why so much more than last year? Do we have more trees?
Well, yes, we have a very mature urban forest, and then rain has a lot to do with it.
Mature trees?
Rain has a lot to do with it too. So if it's a rainy season, we're paying for a lot of water weight. But we do have a lot of trees here, and the amount of leaves we pick up has always been more than surrounding community.
So you're saying the rain has caused the leaves more leaves to fall?
No,
Try-
I'm
no.
saying that it adds to the weight.
They're heavier.
It's weight.
Adds
They had
to
to
the weight.
wait.
leaves are
Right.
richer than
Okay,
dry.
thank you.
Yes.
That makes sense now.
Wait, just because I always see the garbage guys, they're the ones that have the dumpsters, so we just push to the trucks, and then they have the grapples. Where do we use this? I've never seen our equipment actually lifting the leaves up.
Actually, the majority of the leaves we pick up.
Really?
There is one pickup truck that pushes into one Strom garbage truck. So then we have
Must cover my block then, because that's
Yeah.
the only one I ever see.
we have 3 dump trucks out, and then 2 other pickup trucks that are out constantly with the loader loading leaves. So yeah, it's a large operation.
You do well. Thank you.
Lisa, I have one question. The discussion about the gas tanks reminded me that our comp plan had a priority or to look toward electric vehicles, which sounds like something that Public Works would be able to do more than police or fire. So what has Public Works been doing to look into electric vehicles?
Right now, there's a Powering Safe Communities grant that I'm looking into to get an electric vehicle charging station. As far as our fleet vehicles go, we can always look into that in the future. I think they may make more sense for like administrative vehicles, like code enforcement, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we're always looking into it, but I don't have anything specific in mind at this time.
Is that a ComEd grant?
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, where starting to see the use of electric vehicles in municipal fleets have been more focused on the administrative vehicles. So, building inspectors and engineering inspectors, they've gone to some hybrids and things like that. We have such a small fleet. We've got like one true administrative car in the fleet that was replaced maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But we've talked about internally if we were to get a grant and get a charging station here when that car came up, then we could replace it with a. Because I think Oak Park's going to Nissan Leafs or something like that. Yeah.
Do they make big equipment, electric vehicles, like dump trucks and?
Compressed natural gas is the way they use to power larger vehicles. The snow plowing is really what limits your ability to use an electric vehicle. The majority of our vehicles are used for snow plowing, and they're equipped with snow plows. But administrative vehicles make sense. Large dump trucks, you can equip them with compressed natural gas tanks, but you have to find a station to fill those. So I think Oak Park may have one. They used to. I don't know if they still do.
And is that
But that's an option.
Is that a smaller carbon footprint, or?
It is. Yeah, I think Strom has a few compressed natural gas. I know I've seen buses running compressed natural gas. Strom may have one, and I've seen a number of cement trucks that are running compressed natural gas now.
Okay. That wraps up the equipment section. Move on to information technology. And we have a brief overview here of the projects that are included for fiscal year 2021. So I'll spend a few minutes talking about those in greater detail. The first is the implementation of the street camera strategic plan. So this fiscal year, the village's IT consultant helped us complete a strategic assessment for possible expansion of the village's street camera system. It's a pretty robust camera system that already exists in the community that we use as a false multiplier, primarily in the police department for public safety purposes. And you may have heard of a couple examples of when we've been able to use it pretty effectively. So the goal is to expand that system into other key locations throughout the community, primarily in high traffic and commercial corridors. And the expansion of that is costly and a little bit resource intensive. So when we are examining the different locations where these cameras may be installed, to the extent that they're in the TIF district, they are eligible for TIF funding. So that will help offset some of that. But in order to prepare for this expansion, we would need to upgrade the server, replace the server that is used to support it, and also expand the storage system that we use to store the video. Obviously, when you're recording that much video, you need a place to put it. So that is included in that cost. In addition to that, as we scale this system up and propose to move beyond what we're currently doing, we want to make sure that we've identified the best vendor to help us maintain it and make sure that it's operational, because the system is obviously important, and so we want to make sure it's as reliable and stable as possible if it's up and running. So the first year cost includes those costs. In the CIP, we detail the expansion of the camera system in other areas, including the North Avenue TIF, over the next few years. This is a project that's listed as contingent on funding. There's obviously value to it, but given the resources, we just want to be thoughtful about how we proceed with it.
So what is, okay, help me understand that. I mean, isn't it all contingent on approvals?
Sure.
So, well, how do you rank this IT project in your scheme of things? I mean, would you call this critical? Would you call this recommended?
No, we would call it contingent on funding. So the hierarchy is critical, recommended, and contingent on funding. So 1, 2, and 3. So this would be a 3 on that priority list.
So none of your IT initiatives are critical.
Not this year. We've spent some resources the last few years taking care of those most critical pieces. And we're now in a position of being able to maintain, expand, and improve upon what we have. But the pieces that we have coming for this fiscal year are considered recommended.
My personal opinion is I like you to think about, I mean, this is an important area. This is how we improve our efficiency and effectiveness of our right, of what we provide to our community. Customer service and the way we deal with residents. If there's a better way we could serve our residents in a more efficient and effective way, we should do that any way we can. So, I would look at, cameras certainly is a safety issue, which sits right into our number one goal, right? So I don't know how you all decide what is not critical or what is contingent, but I would think some of these IT projects should sit in some of your critical areas. So help me out.
No, I don't think the staff disagrees that they aren't important projects. However, in the prioritization of everything that we do vis-a-vis the amount of funding that we have, in which we have a funding source that, quite frankly, is under some attack recently, we're not exactly sure where all that is going to shake out this year.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's replacing, let's say, a frontline police vehicle versus adding on to our camera system, we would replace the police vehicle before we would add on to the camera system. And again, it's not to say that we can't do this or won't do it, but spending where's the total dollar amount? $365,000 is not insignificant amount of money.
Well, and also it's contingent on there being enough funds in the TIF to actually pay the $220. If you're going to use TIF funding, we don't currently have that money in the TIF fund.
No, we would have to provide a loan for that.
Would be bonded. Well, I hear you. I know everything's critical, and that's all. We hear that quite often, how it needs to be prioritized. But this is an area I think we have to pay particular attention to for the next 5 years, as to how to provide more effective, efficient, resident services.
Sure.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay.
In addition to street cameras, strategic plan implementation, we also are proposing network improvements, the replacement of a backup server that's used to restore data to the village's network in case there's an outage. Obviously, we have a pretty robust backup system, as any organization does nowadays, and so one of the servers that we utilize for that, we're proposing that be replaced. In this, all of our IT recommendations come from an IT strategic plan that was completed last fiscal year as well by our IT consultant, Client First. So they have helped us identify our needs for a multi-year period of time to make sure that we are, that after we've made all these investments and improvements in our system, that we continue to do so.
Who's the private fiber connection? We probably didn't get there yet.
Sure, yeah. Moving on to the next piece. So we currently use a Comcast business connection for our internet service, and our IT consultant is suggesting that we move to a private fiber connection.
You mean our own?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I agree.
Good, thank you. Moving on, speaking about improvements for customer service, certainly that's a point well taken. We went out for RFP. There is an RFP that's out now to replace land and license management software, which is a really long name for what we essentially internally call building permitting software. So the system that we have now is in conjunction with our existing ERP, which is all of our financial management tools. And the system functions, certainly it's operational, but there will be no further expansions and no enhancements of that particular module. That's concerning because obviously we want to improve customer service. There are additional online permitting capabilities, licensing capabilities, application tracking, just a better way to interact with the building department staff through software and technology. So, a better way to create the 24/7 building department where residents can apply, look at the status, get pieces of information back and forth about the status of their projects from the village. So we have gone out to RFP. We'll be making that purchase this fiscal year, and we'll be using a portion of fiscal year 2021 to implement those improvements. And so what you're seeing for land and license management software is the cost of implementation.
Lisa, now that piece of software, is that all encompassing, meaning with dealing with your finance area with
Good question. No.
Okay.
No. So that's currently what we have. So Springbrook is the system that we currently use, and it has a building permitting module, and it's functional to a point. But I think the improvements in customer service have. It's just not a program that's going to support those improvements any further. So I think we've taken Springbrook as far as it can go in terms of the building permitting module. The other pieces of it still function. And so that's not a problem. But in terms of the permitting piece, I think we've gotten as far as we're going to go with that. And so what we're looking at now is a system that would be integrated with Springbrook. And the goal is obviously to get programs that talk to each other pretty well. Yeah, because cashiering and financial management and financial transactions are all a really important piece of that. But to really do what we want it to do, we're going to have to go outside the walls of Springbrook, basically.
No, and I guess my question was more as long as it talks to each other and you can utilize it.
Oh, yeah.
Why buy this if it's not going to work right?
100%.
Okay. Lisa, does it tie to the GIS system?
That's what we're aiming for. That's included in the specs.
So Lisa, I did talk to Eric about this. Some municipalities, they've gone away with actually providing a sticker, car sticker, permit. Yeah. No, on your car.
The
right?
vehicle stickers.
Vehicle sticker. Thank you. Which I think is a great idea. I mean, if you could eliminate all that paperwork, you can eliminate the outsourcing of that paperwork, and they just go on the license plates.
Sure.
That is something I think if other municipalities can do it, certainly our size probably could do it. So what's prohibiting us from looking at that?
Sure, fair. And we had this conversation a little bit today as a staff. Rosie, do you want to jump in on that, or Eric?
Yeah.
We are looking into it. We've been talking to OPARC because they implemented it this past year. There have definitely been some challenges for them, and we want to make sure as we look into it and provide information on that there aren't unintended consequences with that decision.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Do they use a system for that? Is that
It's through Passport.
Oh, okay.
So we already have the program. So it's not something that would be, but there's a lot that goes into the implementation of that.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yeah. And looking at what, as Rosie pointed out, the unintended consequence of not having the vehicle sticker. So the police department uses the vehicle stickers. The officers use it to identify residents. And we've also seen over time that residents also use those stickers to identify other residents when self-policing as well. So those are things we just want to understand and figure out before we came back with a full recommendation on that.
Because we only have one license reader, right? So if
Well,
you're
we
doing
have
parking enforcement, you'd have to get another license reader.
Well, that's the other issue, right? So the we have two LPRs, one on the community service vehicle and one on Squad 6. Now, Squad 6 was just in an accident, not to the village's fault, but now that vehicle's down. So now we're down to one vehicle. So then the question becomes looking at the integration of LPRs and all of our squads and the costs behind that. Then
Sure,
too. Yeah.
but I think it's stuff we need.
Worthwhile. We're
worthwhile.
in the process of seeing how we can make that happen. Certainly. The next item is more so a contribution to a fund to ensure that we're prepared financially in the event that we need to either replace our ERP or upgrade it. Replacing an ERP Eric, Rosie, anybody who's worked in the profession for a little while will
Kathy.
tell you is quite a project. It is labor intensive, it is costly, and it can be disruptive. So we would prefer to maintain our system and upgrade it as those upgrades become available. But in the event that we need to fund its eventual replacement, we want to be prepared financially.
That's so smart. It's very smart.
Moving on, Laserfiche. That's a program, I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, that we use internally. It is an electronic records management program. It has wonderful OCR capabilities, search and retrieval functions. It has become just a really robust source of data for our organization that we use for records management and continue to use and want to expand its use. There are a variety of different ways you can use it, so we're suggesting that we take a little time. This is a project, just to mention real quickly, that's being deferred from this year to next fiscal year. Due to some capacity issues and just wanting to make sure we take the time to do this right. But what we'd like to do is identify additional opportunities that we have to utilize this, not just for internal efficiency improvements, although certainly those are possible, but there's also some robust customer portals that we can start to launch so that residents can have access to certain records online. Number one, it increases transparency. Number two, it makes them more accessible for them. Certainly, again, the notion of the 24/7 Village Hall is a great thing. And also, they no longer have to go through staff to get those records, so they can obtain those documents in a faster time. So we're looking into all of that. So we'd like to analyze some different areas that we have for improvement and then start with implementation of that in the future. And then I think this is, just a little bit more in IT, but we also have our computer replacement program. Just real quickly, this is a system that we've had in place for a few years now, where we break down the computers that we have into different groupings and replace them on a cyclical basis to make sure that we are always staying current with technology and maintaining a good operating environment for people to do their day-to-day jobs. So spreading it out and replacing computers cyclically allows us to avoid really what would otherwise be pretty big spikes in funding if we were to do this all at one time. Finally, in IT, we have some security initiatives that we are recommending be conducted. The first is not just something that was recommended from our IT consultant, but also from our auditor, which is third-party penetration testing. Our IT consultant would not perform this work. This would be another company we would hire just because we really want to test not only our operations, but also our IT company, that our network is secure from potential outside sources. And then we're also suggesting we audit our Active Directory, which is just the directory of users in the system and different access rights and permissions that they have, to make sure that everybody has what they need to do their jobs and doesn't have what they need that they don't need to do their jobs. All right, moving on to streets. Here is an overview of the projects for fiscal year 2021, and we'll go ahead and spend a little bit of time. I know we're kind of coming down to the wire, so I'll do what I can to talk fast, but not too fast. The first is our street patching program, and the purpose of this is to maintain and improve surface condition and prolong the life of village streets, alleys, and parking lots by patching areas on an as-needed basis. We also have the sidewalk, curb, and gutter program. The village is divided into different zones that are inspected on a cyclical basis, every 3 years, in fact, but we inspect the areas near schools, parks, and commercial areas more frequently. And based on those rating surveys, we go ahead and maintain or improve the areas that may be subject to defects, trip hazards, and certainly to avoid any public safety issues. Property owners are able to take advantage of some competitive pricing that we get through this program to replace driveway aprons and courtesy walks, private courtesy walks within the right-of-way. So there's a public-private benefit for this program as well. The alley improvement program includes the reconstruction of the alley between Thatcher and Gale from Hawthorne and Linden, and also includes funds needed to design future alleys that will be improved in the future. So between the alley improvement program and the street improvement program, the process of selecting the streets and alleys that are going to receive improvements is done through an annual rating survey on the conditions of these areas, either through another company, Roadbotics, you may have heard us talk about that recently, or through staff surveys. Those rating surveys are compiled and included in your CIP in the form of maps of the parking lots, alleys, and streets with their rating condition, and we just systematically go through the ones that are rated the poorest and continue to improve them as we go. So these are the areas included in the SIP.
And this is, you'll see a spike in the next 2 years in this dollar amount a little bit.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
In that where we use the bond funds that we just went out to proposal on. In fact, we got a proposal back for 2 years. The interest rate was what, 1% and 1.10%? 1.2. Okay, that's close. Very, very low. Wow. So our paper is good in the market. So,
Holy cow.
but we're using
Exactly.
Wow. They heard Rosie was the finance director.
Right, they
said,
knew
"Well,
it.
we got to
She
get
was in charge.
we got to get on board here." So,
Good
so
job.
we're using those proceeds over a 2-year period to increase the amount of streets that
Yeah.
we resurface in the community.
Really, Lake Oak, isn't that brick?
It is, I think.
On Monroe? Lake?
No, I'm sorry. The only block of brick street we have is Monroe between Chicago to Oak, but
Oh, I thought it was
north
2
of.
blocks.
No, it's just the one.
Take it every day.
All right, so we've talked about street patching and street resurfacing. We also have the street maintenance program, which includes crack sealing and pavement rejuvenation in various areas to, again, extend the life of our roadways. Tearing up a roadway and replacing it is pretty disruptive to those residents. So we'd like to get as much useful life out of our roads as we possibly can. We're also suggesting some improvements to the traffic signal at Chicago and Thatcher. Recently, we talked about signal improvements at Lake and Thatcher, and those will be completed in March. In 2021, we are proposing to modify the signal at Chicago and Thatcher to add pedestrian crossings, left turn arrows, pavement markings, upgrades, ramps, etc., to enhance pedestrian safety at this intersection. We also have funds set aside in the CIP for bike plan implementation, and that is the bicycle plan that was recently adopted after it was reviewed by a resident task force. It was sort of a subset of the comprehensive plan. And it's going to be a multi-phased implementation, and we're dividing it between IDOT streets and non-IDOT streets. IDOT streets, they have to be reviewed and signed off on by IDOT, so we need a little bit more lead time to navigate through their processes. So what we're proposing is that we do the IDOT streets in 2022. In 2021, we'll do the non-IDOT streets, and we will improve those with signage and pavement markings. Also in 2022, we'll be able to take advantage of some of the work with the Des Plaines River Trail along Thatcher. So the timing of those projects will line up a little bit better. The bike plan was funded through some grant funding that our county commissioner was really helpful in getting us, so we were able to take advantage of that. Where there are not linkages, or where there are gaps, between the village routes or non-IDOT routes and IDOT routes, the village, there will be some guidance to assist with connectivity until the entire project is completed, so that people who start using the bicycle routes that are going in 2021 won't be left hanging when they're trying to get from one area to the other. So there will be some solutions for that. Moving on to water sewer, which is the final project section in the CIP. Here is an overview of the different projects that are included in the CIP, and we'll spend a little bit of time talking about each. Keep my comments brief. The first is sewer lining. The purpose of the sewer lining program is to identify sewers that aren't in need of replacement but are starting to show some wear and tear. And there's literally a lining that's installed in the sewers to improve them, enhance them. It's minimally invasive and immediately effective in extending the useful life of our sewers, and it prevents us from having to dig those pieces up. But in the event that there is a piece of sewer that is cracking, crumbling, failing, we have money set aside for sewer point repairs to replace those small sections of sewer where it is needed. The funding levels for these programs are based on a recommendation from the village's consultant, Baxter & Woodman, as part of a rate study they did to help ensure that we have an appropriate level of funding available for this type of work. That same consultant also recommended that the village install a reservoir turbine generator as part of its water distribution system. That's a mouthful. This equipment, basically as water from the city of Chicago comes in, this turbine generator is used to generate electricity and offset River Forest's cost of pumping water. The return on investment of that turbine generator is approximately 5 years. We also have, oops, did I advance a slide? I sure did. My apologies. Water tower improvements. We recently completed some water and tower improvements in River Forest. The next fiscal year CIP includes reinstallation of something called a cathodic protection system. It basically attracts corrosion and keeps it away from the surface of the water tower to prolong the life of that infrastructure. We have underground reservoir improvements, and another string of words that are a mouthful. It's a cleaning and repair and repainting of interior piping and steel appurtenances on both reservoirs. So we're suggesting that be done. We're also suggesting we continue on with the water meter replacement program, and we'll be talking about meters a little further on the next slide. But to the extent that we have an aging infrastructure, we do want to keep it current because failing or deteriorating or aging water meters can result in inaccurate reads, both for the village and the customers. And so we are proposing that we replace 17 meters in fiscal year 2021. We're also replacing the section of water main on Iowa and Thomas between Keystone and Forest, and on Augusta between Thatcher and Keystone. It's about a 1,500-foot section of water main. And we always keep an eye on hydrants that may be a little bit too low to the ground that are in need of replacement as well. So we have funds set aside to tackle those as needed. So moving on to some other applications. In the past, we've talked a little bit about deploying smart city technology wherever possible. Certainly software upgrades are examples of that. The ALPR, the street camera systems, those are all examples of smart city technology. And it doesn't stop at our water and sewer system. So in the past, we've talked about deployable leak sensors. Those truly are sensors that are installed on the water system in various locations that listen when things are quiet for potential leaks. It allows our water department to identify the location of those leaks and make those repairs. It's already been effective. We've deployed it in a few locations. As we began talking about this, the board was very supportive of the concept and gave us the go on the project, which was great. But during that time, there were some new technologies emerging on the marketplace. So it took a little bit of time to look at that and make sure we were deploying the right system. But now that it's in use, it's been immediately effective. So that's been great. So we're talking about continuing to expand implementation or complete implementation of the deployable leak sensors. At the same time, one of the things we want to do is start looking at automated metering infrastructure. So the 2021 CIP includes money for a project management for that. And future CIPs, as you saw in the document, will incorporate what it would take to actually install that infrastructure and complete that project. Automated metering infrastructure is exactly what it sounds like, where the meters are automatic. The communication system is more real time. There's no longer a need to drive by with a radio read machine and take meter read. There's constant communication between the village's system reading those meters as well as the meters themselves. That allows us to identify leaks, identify service issues a little faster. It allows residents to monitor their water usage in real time. It's certainly an enhanced customer service feature so that in the event there is more water usage on that property than you would anticipate, you can identify it, call your plumber, and get those repairs done quickly before you wind up with a bigger water bill than you would have expected. So this is not just smart cities. This is a customer service enhancement. We really believe in this technology. It's been used in other communities. We are excited about the possibility of looking at that here. Depending on what we decide to do with the AMI, the metering infrastructure, that may have an impact on what we do with deployable leak sensors. There are some systems where the two are integrated. There are some situations where the two are standalone. So we want to take a little bit of time next fiscal year to take a look at what the best choice is for River Forest and then come back to you with an implementation plan.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to mention too on the AMI, if you get into which other communities have started to go towards, we may be able to look at a monthly billing cycle as well. So instead of getting a bill every other month, you'd get a monthly bill for service because there would be efficiencies on the reporting end on our side. And the cost of doing that is not insignificant. You're probably looking to implement a AMI system. You'd be looking at a little high 6-figure, low 7-figure dollar amount, and part of that is we would have to go through and then, although we upgrade meters on a continual basis little by little, many of the meters in town are not compliant with an AMI. So the new ones we've been rolling out would be compliant, but we'd have a significant amount of meters that we would have to upgrade, as well as building the mesh network for the radio reads. So more to follow on that, certainly, that in terms of due diligence and the work we would have to do, but certainly not an inexpensive project either.
Lisa, for the sewer lining program, that is just lining more and more of the sewers every year, correct? It's not relining what's already been done.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So wrong direction. There we go. So as we wrap this presentation up, as you can see here, the village has provided a funding snapshot of the various different funding sources that we utilize for the CIP over the next 5 years. Not an insignificant investment, but certainly important to ensuring day-to-day operations and meeting our core values. And as we go through, we've discussed, we prioritize these projects so that we are deploying them and funding them in the most responsible way for the community. As we go through this each year, staff sits down and reviews every line of the CIP together, and there's an effort to identify vehicles and equipment that continue to function in good working order. In cases where those vehicles and equipment are identified, we defer them to future years, while at the same time attempting to avoid deferring them for too long so that we avoid spikes in funding or in of losing pieces that are loses pieces of equipment, that are important to our operations and need to remain functional. The recommendation to defer purchase of certain vehicles is done obviously with all of that in mind. Those were the vehicles that we are recommending be deferred to future years, and this is the list of equipment that we're recommending be deferred to future years as well. Other considerations, obviously as we go through this document, as we go through this process, we want to make sure we're maximizing the value of green infrastructure as much as possible, as well as existing and emerging smart city technologies and incorporating those projects into the CIP. The CIP includes the implementation of recommendations from the Comprehensive Plan and Bicycle Plan. Staff continues to explore different funding sources, alternative funding sources, whenever possible, whether it's through grant funding, new revenue sources, or collaboration with surrounding communities and agencies where shared services, shared resources are available and make sense for our community. Examples of some of those grant funds include the FEMA grant that we talked about earlier with the police radios. As John mentioned, he's exploring a grant opportunity for alternative fuel sources in addition to a few others that we're looking into. The police department, as you know, was awarded the grant that allowed them to install new and upgraded equipment in one of their squad cars. So there's some really great opportunities out there, and we continue to explore those. Our next step is to seek direction from you regarding the projects that are to be funded in the next fiscal year, and whether there are any projects that you would like us to consider that we haven't already discussed. And any approved projects will be included in the next budget, which will be presented to you in the coming weeks and months for your review. Thank you.
The only one I have is I'd like to see the cameras along Madison Street.
All right, thank you.
Any other suggestions? Okay, very good, Lisa. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. That was
Appreciate your
excellent.
time.
You did a phenomenal job. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Eric. Thank you. Thank you for that great interest. Woo. All right. So, having no further other comments or questions from the trustees, we'll go ahead and adjourn the committee of the whole meeting. So, I'll ask the. I guess we don't need a motion. We just adjourn, right?
No, you motion.
Yeah, we need a motion.
To adjourn.
Okay. All right.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Let's just take 2 minutes.